Welcome to my channel. My name's Bisi and Akasha's awake. Now, firstly, I wanted to say I'm really sorry that this breakdown is a little bit delayed. Thank you so much for being patient with me. But this week's episode had a very, very clear running theme, in my opinion. I mean, there's so much to get into, but the theme that kept coming back and back to me was Predators. From Louis touching Regina like that while she's under his influence, to Daniel using that student aggressively on the 11th of December 1990, and Armand. Absolutely everything he's ever done, and yeah, what he's doing with Larry and Alex. Then of course there's Gabriella, who's preyed on Lestat his entire life. Now, as I said, there's so much to go over this week, plus there's a very juicy spoiler section at the end of the video. But first, if you do like my videos, please do think about subscribing. I want to say a massive thank you to everyone who has hit subscribe. We've gone from 11% to 12%, but I would love to get that number up. Ideally, I would love to get it to 50%. Okay, and with that said, let's get into the breakdown. Okay, so in the opening scenes, we learned that Lestat will stop at absolutely nothing to record this album. An album that he's going to perform just once at a concert that will become infamous. And I'll go into that concert in spoiler section 1. We'll learn that he will leave the studio just once in 4 months, and that will be to help Louis, but that's much later in the episode. But I will note that later on in this episode, Lestat asks Sophia if the band's performance, make more, satisfied the request. And as we can't forget that he's doing all of this for her. It's her plan for the Great Conversion. He tries, unsuccessfully, to get the sound that he needs from the band. The drums, he's heart. The guitar, he's hunger. The bass, he's night terrors. The lead guitar, he's frailty. And notably, Lestat says, "But I am now digress." Now, this is probably the first time that anybody who's just watched the show has heard the name Amel, and it was repeated quite a few times in this episode, and I'm going to go into a lot of detail about this in spoiler section 2. But for now, we learn that Lestat also faked his death after the shooting. Lestat is still plagued by his muses. I mean, Muse Nikki seems to be tormenting him, whilst he actually welcomes Muse Louis into the booth with him. And I did notice that when Muse Louis walked away, Lestat just couldn't take his eyes off him. And another thing to note is that Muse Louis is dressed from the night of his turning. And another side note, we learned that it was indeed Marius's wrist that we saw in the bunch of clips that we saw from Lestat when he had his breakdown on stage when Larry wouldn't play the tambourine. We're then introduced to Marius and Akasha. And do you know, it's only just dawned on me that Lestat got himself together very quickly after everything that happens with the Queen. I mean, he meets Louis in 1910, and we know that things hit the fan after 1900. But that's skipping right ahead. Back to now, we're finally introduced to Marius. He revived Lestat on a Spanish shore, I think. And as far as Lestat knew, from Armand, Marius was no longer alive. Marius calls Armand a rotten boy, and my goodness, I don't think he's wrong. But after Armand's description of his time with Marius in season 2, well, I don't have much sympathy for Marius. In fact, I have none. Does a rotten maker make a rotten boy? I guess we'll have to wait to see a little bit more show Marius before we make up our minds. Marius brings Lestat back to his lair, the place where she is kept. He informs Lestat that he saved him at her request, and that Lestat is now the keeper, her keeper. However, in the novel, Lestat's music is the thing that awakens Akasha. But in the show, we see that Lestat learned to play during his time with her. Back in the studio, we learn that Alex is no longer vegan, and in fact, he's off the wagon, and Larry is worried. Lestat thinks that this is distracting him. However, notably, it doesn't distract Lestat. He's so singularly focused on this album that he puts aside all else, even his hatred for Sam Barkley. And when Sam seems complacent, Lestat reminds him that this is the job, Sam. Get on with it. Very much like the way that he had to get on with looking after the Queen after Marius left him. And back with Marius, it seems like he couldn't get out of there quick enough. However, he is providing instruction to Lestat. as he packs. How to please her? Bring her presents of the present. How to feed her? With only ash, blood overwhelms her. But these instructions are rushed. We learn that after Gabriella left Lestat in Spain, he spent 80 years underground. Marius tells Lestat that Akasha loves music, but Lestat doesn't know how to play. It's at this point we learn of a new power in the show, mimicry. Marius instructs Lestat to think of his fledgling Nicholas as inspiration. We also learn of Enkil's fate, and that all vampires are linked through Akasha. There was a night, the 19th of December, 1802, when the vampires' bodies burned under the moon, not the sun. Marius had been transporting Akasha and Enkil from one crypt to another when he got drunk and fell asleep. He awoke next to Akasha, his body alight. This was because he hadn't finished the job, and he had left Enkil outside in the sun. And note, the back of Enkil's head is smashed in. His right foot has been broken off. Same with his index finger on his right hand. And of course, he's eternally looking towards Akasha. Now, I don't know for sure, but I think those injuries may be linked to another event, maybe. But ultimately, Lestat learns the essential and awful truth. Akasha is the mother of all vampires. And if she's destroyed, they're all destroyed. We catch up with Daniel, who's been continuing to interview fans of the vampire Lestat post-shooting. We get a glimpse of Armand's ability to possess another. And note, this man, I think, looks like a vampire. I mean, it's the eyes, don't you think? We learn that Armand has indeed been following Daniel for the last 52 years. He'd been sitting on the end of his bed in motel rooms while he was passed out. He's been rescuing Daniel whilst Alice was at home pregnant. And I think that this is confirmation that Armand is not Alice. At least, it confirms it for me. Daniel asks Armand to prove that he loves him. And Armand begins to list very significant moments in Daniel's life where he had input. We learn that Daniel isn't quite as sound as we may have once presumed. On the 11th of February, 1990, at a reading, Daniel aggressively uses a student in his rented car. And Armand wiped that terrible memory from the student's mind and made sure that student got home. Now, Armand is using very gentle wording here, but it sounds to me that Daniel did something terrible to the student, who presumably would have been aged somewhere between 18 and very, very early 20s. And Daniel would have been at least 37 in 1990. Daniel then left the boy where? On the street? After he had used him aggressively, with no care of what would happen to him next. Now, I've got to admit that learning this, well, it sickened me. We also hear about one of Daniel's daughter's graduations. She attended Rice University, which initially I thought was a nod to Anne Rice, but actually there is a Rice University in America, I believe. But this still could be a nod to Anne, which I appreciate. Daniel's daughter really didn't want him there. And when Daniel sought solitude in the chapel, which Armand led him to, Armand induced a coughing fit in the priest so that Daniel could have 30 minutes to cry in peace. Now, that sounded to me like he ended the priest. Wild. Armand interrupted Daniel when he was about to say that he would never love him. I mean, this could have been because he couldn't bear to hear it. I don't know. But he entices Daniel by revealing that Sophia is Gabriella, Lestat's mother. Plus, he offers Daniel what he wants. Lessons on how to harness his gifts. So, yeah, Louis lost it. I mean, there's not much more I can say about this scene other than, Louis! This was my reaction when an actress was being brought in to play Madeline.
Both of you.
I wish we could stay longer.
No! And note, Regina is wearing another yellow dress. Now, this is reminiscent of the last dress that Claudia wore. The same dress that hangs in Louis' reading room. There's another scene with Louis and Regina by the lake, and Louis takes things way too far. Regina says, "Come on, make me a stone." And Louis does. And just a side note, this is the first we see of Louis exhibiting his powers in front of her. And while she's under his control, Louis reached out and touches her. And I screamed at the television. I mean, honestly, his behaviour seemed to disgust him too. And note, was Regina asking to be made stone foreshadowing? Many of you kindly let me know that Regina's name means queen. I wonder. And then another note. I think Regina was actually writing in one of Claudia's actual diaries. And if she was, that's crazy. We go to Alex and Larry. And Armand likes them vulnerable, doesn't he? And I've been wondering what it was that triggered Alex to start drinking again. Now, I'm really angry about this as he was doing so well. I mean, he missed the band and he was missing out on all of their newfound success when he left. But he remained sober and he was going to meetings. But then, that safe place of encouragement and understanding was infiltrated by Armand. And since then, Alex has fallen off the wagon. I mean, it's just so sad. Alex says to Larry, "You're a shredder with an axe. One take and then rest." And I believe this is Armand speaking through Alex. I think he's been possessed by Armand. Now, if not 100% of the time, definitely very often. And note, we learn that their surname is Slater, and not the Christian Slater who played Daniel in the 1994 movie Interview with the Vampire, I believe. Now, Lestat has been suspended in the air for 3 days. His music and his blood has awakened the Queen. She's confused, she's in pain, and Akasha's performance, wow. There's this vulnerability when she says, "I am the girl," but there's also power when she says, "I am the knight." And she evokes terror and awe throughout the entire monologue. Who is the architect of this suffering? Why must my voice be smooth? Lest I seem aggressive? The "I am the girl" especially? Oof. And if a male won't answer, then the answer to her questions must be I. Me. No one else. Me. I. Just stunning. Now, of course, I even mentioned a male here too. And I'm going to go right into that in spoiler section 2. So look out for it if you do want to know. So it also mentions a tongue being cut out, and that's going to be spoiler section 3. Just before Lestat receives the messages from Louis, we see Lestat being kind to his younger self. He seems to be the only one who ever was, and it was really lovely to see actually. Not everyone is as kind to their younger selves. And you know, it's a terrible thing when you're simply existing. And in doing so, you attract the attention and obsession of someone else. Their issues, their desire, their needs, their imagined connection with you, their intensity somehow becomes your problem. I try really, really hard not to project my personal experiences onto these characters, but it's so disappointing to me that some people continue to demonize Regina. They act like she sought Louis out. They speak as though she orchestrated this entire situation. As though having issues with money or having an OnlyFans is proof that she's a predator. We learn that, even after they've made their agreement, Louis has been hounding her, constantly bringing her 100 texts a day, showing up at her work, continuously watching her. Now, anyone who's experienced anything like this knows just how overwhelming this type of attention is. So much so that even after $500,000 as compensation, she still needs to walk away sometimes because it gets too much. And note, what do you think the freaky thing that happened was that made Regina take this shift, this time, and made Louis call Lestat? I dread to think. Louis knows that he's fallen off the deep end, and he reaches out to Lestat for help. Despite Lestat being upset that Louis didn't call after he was shot, he still helps, reminding me that Lestat would do anything for Louis. The emotion on Lestat's face as he sits opposite an almost exact replica of his daughter is haunting. Lestat can pick out only 2 differences between Claudia and Regina, but he seems to be protecting Louis by telling Regina that she's hurting him. And note, I found it very interesting that Regina wasn't scared of Lestat. And although she was offended, she held her own. Lestat and Louis both agree that the spark that was in Claudia's eyes, Regina doesn't have. And this is the inspiration for Lestat writing the most moving song in the entire series, in my opinion. Her stained glass eyes, staring at him until the very end. Her stained glass eyes that are still with him. They continue to stare into his soul. In fact, it's the catalyst for a complete creative change for the album. And note, Sam Barkley produced this song, but he was a major contributor to Claudia's passing. So was Lestat, but I do believe there is more to learn about that. But I just wondered, what did Sam feel whilst he was working on this song in particular? I wish we got a little bit more time on his reaction to see if he felt remorse or indifference. Then we move on to Armand and Larry in the subway. Larry's left the band. The remaining members wish to be turned, with TC reciting, "Make More." Larry's alone on the subway when Armand sneaks beside him. He repeats Alex's words to Larry. "Total shredder with an axe. Diabolical." Armand then gets into Larry's head with the good old rest routine. And sadly, force Larry to end right there. Now my question is, why did he do that to Larry? To what end? What plan could possibly benefit from Larry jumping? Lestat said that what Armand did was worse than what the Queen does, and I believe him. Now for those who've been watching my videos for a while, you know that I try to remain balanced, and I do like to see both sides of the events when presented to us. But I've got to tell you, I'm finding it really difficult with this one. But in the spirit of fairness, I will present a possible motive for Armand's actions. And just note, I by no means agree or think that it justifies his actions, but Armand may believe that he's acting for the greater good by removing mortals that are subject to the great law breaks. Again, not an excuse in my opinion, but it could be his reasoning. But the fact remains, we haven't heard his reasoning in the show just yet. So anything said right now is just speculation. And that's about as much energy as I can give him right now, I'm afraid. Okay, thank you so much for watching. That's been my breakdown of episode 5. If you enjoyed this video and you haven't already, please do subscribe. And if you'd like to stay spoiler free, then I will say goodnight for now, and I will see you in my next one. But for those of you who are going to stick around, let's get into the spoilers. Okay, so spoiler section 1 is the infamous concert. Now, I mentioned this earlier in the video, and we know that in this season, Lestat has been on tour. However, in the book, The Vampire Lestat, Lestat didn't actually go on tour. He did one concert only, and I think this season is going to culminate in this one big show. Now, at the concert, there were lots of other vamps who were very, very angry at Lestat for exposing the truth. Now, this is a very big spoiler, but at the concert, Akasha then takes out all of Lestat's opponents, let's call them. And at the very end, after he leaves, she abducts him. And that is how The Vampire Lestat ends. Now on to spoiler point 2. The name Emil is said many times in this episode. Now if you haven't heard of Emil, this is going to be pretty interesting. Now in the book and in the show, Lestat has Akasha's blood within him. And we see it in this episode, how he gets that blood. But he also has the blood of Emil in him. Now, the story I'm about to tell you is from The Vampire Lestat, but there is a different story of how this unfolded in the novel Queen of the Damned. But Marius doesn't learn that truth for thousands of years, so I'm going to focus in this section on what Marius learns and therefore tells Lestat in The Vampire Lestat. And for context, Marius is being told this story by the previous keeper. Okay, so in Old Egypt, there's stories of spirits. The type that hurl furniture around, that make women scream obscenities. And King Enkill said that he will speak to this spirit, and if it doesn't work, he would agree for it to be cast out. Enkill says that he understands why the spirits rage. It's because they don't have bodies. They can work the body, but they can't inhabit them. He was about to lock himself in the haunted house when Akasha tried to stop him. She eventually locked herself in there with him. The noises from inside the house were frightening, and cracks began to appear on the walls. And the only ones who remained outside were the few men who actually hated Enkill and Queen Akasha. They always had. When night fell, they crept into the haunted house, and when they saw Akasha and Enkil sat in the middle of the floor with objects flying around them, the men set upon them and stabbed them over and over. Enkil shouted, "No, you don't see what you've done. You've given the spirits a way in. You've opened my body to them." The men ran, believing that they had successfully taken the king and queen out. And upon returning to the haunted house, the king and queen stood there. All their wounds healed. Their eyes had taken on an eerie light, their skin pale. They had been entered by the spirit, at the point where mortal life would have ended. But it was the blood that it wanted, a combination of human and spirit. All that was left of the king and queen was what the blood could animate. The spirit itself had no character, but it enhanced theirs. They were new things. They could no longer eat food or age or have children. Then the terrible discovery that the only thing that could keep their corpses animate was blood. It couldn't get enough. They were drinkers of the blood. They could not get rid of it. And of course, that spirit's name was Amil. Now, for spoiler section 3, I've been really struggling with how much to share. Now, Akasha mentioned about a tongue being cut out, and I think she's referring to the twins, the red-haired twins. Now, we found out all about them in The Queen of the Damned, but I don't want to give everything away right away because we've just had the slightest mention. But what I will say is that they are over 6,000 years old. They are witches, but in that they can communicate with spirits. They always have been. And remember, Amel was a spirit. I will also say that I think that they are playing a part in what's happening right now in current events, if they're going to remain true to the book. And finally, I will say that the atrocities that happened to these twins. And I think that's where I'm going to leave it, for now anyway. Okay, thank you so much for watching. Again, I'm really sorry that this was late. Life has been lifing and I can't complain, but yeah, I just got really, really busy. But thank you so much for being patient with me. I hope you've enjoyed this video. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. And I will see you next week for the penultimate episode. Okay, thank you again. Thanks. Bye.